Is AI writing writing? Is AI art art? No. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Oh, you wanted an argument? Yeah, I can do that. Hi, I'm Magpie, and I'm not a Luddite about AI. My father was an early pioneer of AI, and I grew up with it. I was involved in a lot of Gen AI, including like overseeing whether to do Gen AI projects at my last job. And I've used AI for certain purposes and advocated there are genuine use cases for it. That said, trying to use AI as writing to write blog posts or books, that's not writing. That is a different use case that I will get into. And so this video, we'll see how I organize it, but I'm going to start by talking about why I really do not think you should be considering AI LLM writing of blog posts and books as writing. And I'm probably going to talk a bit about a specific blog post arguing that you should. And then I'm going to talk about, in general, why I think it is that you see a lot of these AI creators making this argument. But the short of it is that I think that they understand on some level that they are pushing slop. They're also making decent money from it. And so it's sort of a defensive thing to try to keep people from pushing too much and ending the money, and or to get people to acknowledge, give them the status as real writers. So anyways, let's start with why I'm making this video, because Substack recently rolled out a feature called Pangram, which doesn't seem to work on desktop, so I haven't been able to test it on my own writing. I haven't been able to find it. But it's supposed to detect whether any writing that you've written is written by AI. And they wrote a blog post on this, which was frankly kind of cringe. They were bending over backwards to say, hey, we're not saying that AI writing is invalid, just that it has different use cases, which, I mean, I'm saying the same thing, but I'd also say that AI blogs on Substack is kind of like having AliExpress imports on Etsy, although other people might compare it more to like CNC or 3D printing stuff on Etsy. But even there, Etsy now has rules, at least nominally, that you have to have designed those things yourself and you can't be sublicensing them, which anyways. So then there was someone who runs an AI blog that she's been open about. She wrote a post which Allison Talks Books responded to, which is a great video that I recommend you check out if you haven't seen it after this one. And she really was she's a lot more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt on this than I am, and treating it like it's a genuine good faith question. I don't really think it is. But anyway, she was trying to find social science research to back these points up, and she found really two things. One of them is evidence that the process of writing, it clarifies your thought in the process, which is kind of like a no-duh thing to me, like I could have told you that. And in fact, I want to talk about having a human who is actually good at writing do your writing for you, ghost writing, which a lot of, especially self-help books do this, and there's three that I've talked about that have, I don't know if it's pedantically, technically ghostwriting because they're open about someone else wrote it. But first of these is The $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan and Tal Raz. And this is a book where I noticed there are several things where I'm like, this is not really clear. And I think if Noah Kagan was writing it himself, it would have been clearer. But it seems to me like it's a case of he had sort of the cliff notes, gave it to the ghostwriter, and the ghostwriter maybe asked questions, but it's not the same thing as having one person do it, which isn't necessarily a complete argument against ghostwriting, and I'll get into that. But this is the most obvious example of a self-help book that I have said has some merit, where it's obvious ghostwriting is a detriment to the quality of the book. And then this book I talked about in my video, Thinking Fast and Slow, The One Thing, by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And so Keller is the founder of Keller Williams Real Estate, and then Jay Papasan is presumably the actual writer of this book. And I mentioned this book is 220 pages. I went up to my bedroom and I read it, and I'm like, that seemed fast. And I looked and it was under an hour. It took me like 50 minutes or less to read 220 pages, which, as with a lot of self-help books, there's fewer words on the page than a normal book, but still that's fast because it was kind of redundant, and so I could read it for information. And I do wonder if it had actually been Gary Keller writing this himself, if there would have been more detail, because I mean, it was an easy read, but I also think probably this could have been fundamentally like a pamphlet or even a blog post. And then this last book, How Big Things Get Done by Bent Flyberg and Dan Gardner. So presumably Dan Gardner is the actual author. And this one, I didn't notice anything. Like, it was detailed, it was good. I didn't feel like there was anything missing, but I still wonder what would have been different if Bent Flyberg had written it. But he's also a very busy person. And so that is sort of the thing about ghostwriting, is often the people writing this books don't have the time. And I think there are, like, because you can write a whole book yourself, we have this attitude that, well, you generally should. But when it comes to media where you can't, like movies, we understand you have a producer. And I think you can make a case that there's times where it makes sense for writing to like have someone ghostwriter as a producer. But this is with an actual human who is actually genuinely skilled at writing. And even then you lose something when you're not fully working your thoughts out yourself. And so I can like attest to this myself, like 95% of the time, if I feel like I can't get my ideas out succinctly and clearly, it's because I haven't worked them out enough. And once I've worked them out enough, I can generally get them out pretty succinctly. I am now at the point where I have so many ideas that I've like workshopped talking to people that I haven't written. I know the time and energy. But even there, my attitude is I need to get better at learning to put these thoughts out as succinctly as possible and not outsource it to an AI to write it in long-form corporate speak, which honestly I don't think would necessarily be faster anyways, at least the process that this person who wrote this blog post got into. And then the other thing that Allison talked about was that if you are bad at like writing, so AI writing is basically slightly below average corporate speak. And so I don't know how many people their writing is a little below average corporate speak or below that, but probably a lot. And if you're at that level, yeah, it's going to make your writing better. But that's not a sign that it's going to make you a better writer or help you writing. That's just a sign that you are a bad writer. And it's questionable, like, do you have anything worth saying? Because I think people who have things worth saying generally try to find a way to articulate themselves, whether it's writing or whether it is speaking. And I'm, of course, doing both. My natural tendency is writing, but I screwed up my hands, so I have to use speech-to-text anyways, and it's constantly screwing up tiny things, especially reversing. It likes to put negation where there isn't, remove negation where there is, and put random question words in. So it is now a lot harder for me to actually write, and so I've actually learned to get better at public speaking. But anyways, so I see this as it's the equivalent of, well, for example, using auto-tune to sing, which I am a terrible singer. And if I wrote a song, I might potentially use auto-tune to correct myself singing it if I wanted to promote the songwriting. But that's not me trying to be a better singer. That's me trying to show off my songwriting, right? And the way that auto-tune generally gets used is by like large corporate media franchises. They want someone, they don't have to worry about the singing. They want someone who is conventionally attractive, who is controllable, and they can sort of mass produce that. And it's an attempt to produce what James C. Scott in Seeing Like a State calls legibility, which I'm going to come back to this because the blog post that Allison found completely gets legibility backwards. And I'm certain she hasn't read this book. But anyways, so yeah, using AI will, if you're terrible at writing, it will make you mediocre enough that like a lot of corporate people would accept it. But of course, why are they going to have you do it when they already have their own AI? I don't think it's adding value, like trying to do this independently. Corporations want this corporate speak because they're aiming for legibility. And actually, so if I think about, I've talked about Jean Baudrillard, simulacra and simulation a couple times, and he's best known for his 4 levels of simulacra, which are, so the first level is it is a reflection of profound reality, which I would describe as like that's a map of the territory. And then it masks and denatures a profound reality as a second order simulacra. And that would be like a map of a map. Like my videos, when I'm explaining these concepts to you, this is a second order simulacra. I'm summarizing the basic idea of a map to either put my first order ideas out there, like my original maps, or to point to, you might want to actually look at this map yourself. And then third order simulacra is it masks the absence of a profound reality. And then a fourth order simulacra is it has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacra. And so if you think about this, so corporate speak, like, is generally, they're trying to summarize ideas that are already out there. Typically, they're already at least one level removed. Like I've noticed MBA programs and corporate speak is based on good ideas that then get sort of distorted. So already you're looking at second or third order simulacra. And then when you're trying to use AI to sort of mimic corporate speak, I mean, it passes well enough, but at this point you are at least third, if not fourth order simulacra. And I said, like, I think first and second order simulacra have value. Beyond that, you should be trying to avoid it. That said, there are use cases for these kind of AI blogs. I noticed early in my blog, which I now only have a little over 300 subscribers, I think, but early on when I had like under 100, some of my first comments were from what was very obviously an AI blog on AI, which seems to be a popular thing to do. And this blog had paid turned on, had 4,000 subscribers. If they had a number of blogs on different topics, they were probably making a living on that, or if they're in the third world. And I was looking at that and wondering, what is the value they are adding? They have 4,000 people subscribing. Because I was looking at it, and it is very basic ideas explained badly in an overly verbose way that is often missing. It's simultaneously longer than it needs to be to get to the core ideas, while also not getting a lot of the nuance that I would get if I were being that verbose. And I think the value is basically in curation, because people like me who have a lot of experience in AI, I tend to take these things for granted, right? I'm not going around and explaining them to people. And so this is presumably a person finding these topics they find interesting, knowing little about AI, and explaining them for a similar audience. Is there value in that? For the people who are subscribing and possibly paying, presumably, do I think it's a good use of time? Would I thought about it, I was like, I probably could make blogs like this and make a living, but I'm like, I wouldn't believe in it because I don't believe I'm adding anything to the world. Like, if I want to try to explain AI to a more general audience, I want to try to do it myself, trying to get to the essentials and not just sort of grab at what is interesting sounding as like a simulacra of a simulacra. And this blog, who was complaining about the Substack announcement, 5,000 subscribers, so similar order of magnitude. And I don't know if these blogs cap out at that. I do imagine there's a cap because there is going to be limited demand for these sort of exceptionally mediocre summaries, sort of for people who want to feel like a little personalized, informed. And to me, like, looking at this, because I've done stuff with Copilot, and in fact, last year, I am someone who is genuinely like, I have original ideas that are often too original, and it's like I have to explain them to people. I typically have to start out sort of explaining them to people who generally can follow me, then explaining them to people who often have a harder time following me, and sort of working my way down to more normal people before I actually can get them out. And so one of the things that I was doing last year is this was my Microsoft Copilot, it was not login walled. And I was going through, I would go through all the facts related to the argument I was going to make. And I would see, first of all, can it predict the argument that I'm going to make, which I would say it did adequately. Like, because I was a TA when I was in grad school, like if a student was providing this as a summary of what someone had actually written, I would accept it and give them like a B on their paper about 80% of the time. And then I would correct the stuff it got wrong, and it would repeat it back to me, and it would still miss a lot of nuance. So it's clear to me, like, I absolutely would not trust AI to get my points right, which is something that Allison raised, is I think a lot of people don't notice that it's getting your points subtly wrong. Or if you feel like it's getting your points right, it means either you're extremely unoriginal, or you haven't really thought out the details of what you're saying, or you're not really paying enough attention to notice where it is sort of misrepresenting you. Again, simulacra of a simulacra of a simulacra. And so, like, it's not writing. There is a use case for it, but I've been thinking about a couple of essays. So this one, Ursula Le Guin, Stalin and the Soul, afterword to Evgeny Zamyatin's famous, like, pioneering dystopian novel, We, is talking about what is actual art. And her definition is that it has to have integrity, and it has to be intelligent. And I feel like that's a good approximation. Like, we know good art when we see it. And like, I have a chip on my shoulder against Andy Warhol as obviously not art, which Le Guin brings up as an example. And I've actually written posts on sort of fake versus real avant-garde, but I also think I connected it to Lilies That Fester by C.S. Lewis. But if I didn't, like, a lot of the attitudes of these people who are trying to do AI writing is that they have things they want to say that they think are original, and they feel like people should read them. And so two things. So one is people who think the value of their ideas is in their originality are generally not at all original people. Like I am someone, I have, again, more original ideas than I can deal with. And I've recognized for at least all my adult life that the value of my ideas is not in my originality, but in figuring out which of my ideas are going to appeal to people, be useful, that I can explain to people in an accessible way. But the ideas themselves are a dime a dozen. I just have way more ideas, and people will comment like, how do you, I'm just a very weird person. And so people who are genuinely original recognize it's not the value of the ideas, it's what you are doing with them, how you are presenting them, how you are articulating them. And I've been thinking about this also in the context of Jose Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses, which I've referenced a few times on my blog, but I don't think I've talked about on this channel yet. You can see I sticky noted, like, this is a very quotable book that is also, I'm going to have more to say on this because it's sort of a big part of my crisis of faith in my previous understanding of egalitarianism and individualism. But one of the points that he makes is that, like, the masses, sort of your average person, wants everything to be accessible to them without challenging them, and wants sort of acclaim and power just for being who they are. And they tend to resent the people that Ortega y Gasset calls minorities, people who are genuinely original, because they aspire to get what they see as the benefits of being that without actually doing anything to get there. And then Ortega y Gasset recognizes a subclass of minorities that he calls natural aristocrats, which I know that's a cringe term, but it's also a memorable term, which he defines as being someone determined never to make the same mistake twice, which I've referenced Anne of Green Gables. That's one reason I relate it to her. She says, like, I make a lot of mistakes, but hopefully I'll run out of mistakes to make because I try to never make the same mistake twice. And the masses tend to particularly resent these. And I'm going to probably make a whole video at some point on this idea of mass man, because there's a lot of books sort of dealing with the topic from different angles. But they are, you know who they are if you've seen them. You might be one of them. I have seen at least, I think my audience is mostly not people like that, but especially if this video takes off, might get a few of those people. And the midwit is sort of the embodiment of the mass man put in positions of power and influence. And they try to change institutions that favor minorities, favor what Ortega y Gasset calls natural aristocrats, to their own standards, which is sort of the point of Lilies That Fester. So I didn't actually get into this, talk about it in this video, but basically C.S. Lewis talks about we've sort of had a shift in culture as we've shifted to managerialism, which he didn't name but was describing it. We've shifted from the idea that the goal of the artist is to make art that people will appreciate, to this idea that the goal of the public should exist to provide an income for creative professionals who are not actually that creative. And that is sort of the attitude you see of the masses of these midwit types who think the value of what they are adding is in their originality. And credit where credit is due, the author of this blog post, which I will link that Allison was citing, is more original than a lot of these AI blogs and videos, because I've seen more videos than blogs, because Substack's discovery algorithm is absolutely terrible, so I don't even try to do discovery. But I've seen AI YouTube videos, and I've seen predictable traits, and what she says is the way she's doing it is she's basically describing her ideas to a large language model and having it write each section out, which sort of gels with what I was seeing, because I was looking at it and I'm like, I have tried, I have a bunch of unrelated things, and I've tried, like, with LLMs, mostly Copilot, see if it can find the connection between them, whether there is one that I see or not. And it has a tendency to, if the connection isn't obvious to it, it will just drop it. Sometimes it'll drop it if I spell it out to them. And her post really doesn't hang together. It's like a bunch of sort of different tangentially related arguments. And I'm like, yeah, I can see it would actually be hard to get an LLM to write something like this straight, because it's going to try to actually find a through line and drop sort of a lot of the digressions. But I'm annoyed by two things in this post in particular. And I usually try not to make, like, response call-out videos, but I am really, really annoyed by these two things. And so one of them is the way that she presents legibility, which she doesn't cite Scott. I'm guessing, I would be very surprised if she didn't learn about the idea from the LLM based on the way it's presented, as it's something that some political scientists talk about, because Scott was a political scientist, but it's not talked about a lot in the political science literature, but it is talked a lot about in pop culture. Generally reasonably true to Scott's ideas, although in this case, she's reversing it and saying that AI detection is legibility for the people who don't want like independent creators taking advantage of like these AI tools. And I'm like, no, like they don't see you as a threat. The people who are frustrated are the consumers who don't like what you're provided. And what AI is doing is it is making your work more legible to this sort of wants to feel sort of pseudo-informed crowd. And which is also what, again, corporate speak, even humans writing it, even before, that's what they were doing. And like, I can tell generally if someone is writing, like writing is AI. And if I can't, if they're writing something that is original and thought-provoking, and I can't tell it's AI, well then I don't care that it's AI. But I've seen enough people thinking they're original and using AI to be like, yeah, you think you're being original, but you're using AI because you can't, yeah, you're not getting what originality is, and you're overestimating your own sort of creativity and originality. And so this is something you see a lot with managerialism, is it tends to take, like, co-opt and reverse ideas in defense of itself. And so fundamentally, there is this managerialist, or I guess it might be more accurate to say it's the attitude of the masses, as Ortega y Gasset describes it, of I feel like I have ideas and I want people to be out there and I want them to respect me for it and I want to make a living doing it. And with 5,000 subscribers, she's probably not making a living, but she's certainly doing a lot better than I am financially. And if she had several of these blogs, she probably could be making a living or living in a third world country. And so the question becomes, how genuine is the demand for these? Because a big part of the reason people want to detect this is that people want a human involved, but most people are not as good as detecting. And I've fallen for AI before, but generally if I see a few posts by something that's AI, I pick up on it pretty quickly because I have a lot of experience, not just with current models, but like with the whole development. And then I've used it, so I know what it looks like. And again, if you're original enough that I can't tell, I don't care that you're using AI. The problem is, for someone like me, I also want to understand what like more normal people are thinking. And AI is actually, that's one of the things it's good at. That's one of the things I still use it for. I've stopped using Copilot because Microsoft login walled it, and now I use Gemini. And Gemini is worse than Copilot, but it's okay at this, is the perspectivism of what do normal people think about stuff. And using it that way, like as a dynamic thing, when I know I'm using AI, I'm happy to do that. But I'm also looking for people who are more normal, what they're saying, what their arguments are. And the issue you used to have was bot farms. First Russian bot farms, now it seems to be more India and Nigeria, where they're putting out ideas that are either pushing a narrative or just trying to be controversial to get attention. And I don't want that. I want to actually try to understand what normal people are saying, which is one of the reasons I watch people who are like famous enough that I actually know where they come from. That's often distorted, right? That's the reason I watch Asmongold, is I feel like he's a very good representation of what like normie sort of blue collar conservative think, without a lot of distortion that most people who sort of rise up get. And so like there's value in that, but I want it to actually be a genuine person. And so if it's someone who is using AI and getting the AI summary, I would rather be doing it myself. And that's the thing, is AI as an interactive tool has some merit, but when you're thinking you are like curating it, most of the time it is not as interesting as you think. And there is an audience for it, just like, I mean, I don't want to insult fan fiction to comparing it to it, but a lot of fan fiction is worse writing than AI results, but you still have an audience. But the value of AI is in this like dynamic element. And I've noticed, like, after Microsoft login walled Copilot, the like AI results stopped being dynamic and they got dramatically worse than they were originally, often better than Wikipedia or whatever they were pulling from. And now they're worse. And it's like big corporations and these people making these blogs are making this same mistake. But anyways, so I think people have a tendency, we give people benefit of the doubt, we give them credit. And so if we see that your writing isn't that good, but it seems like you're trying, and then you're sort of taking advantage of that benefit of the doubt if you're not open about AI, which again, this writer is, but a lot of these blogs are not. Like the one who was commenting on my blog was very obviously AI, but not open about they were using AI to write this stuff. And so basically, again, there are use cases for AI that I have defended. And in fact, I wrote a blog post defending like people doing like AI music propaganda videos. Propaganda, I mean, you have some like Soviet art that is good, but usually propaganda is kind of disposable. It's the same sort of managerialist stuff. And so letting people make sort of high production quality propaganda, like I'm fine with that as long as it's clear that's what you're doing. But it is, again, it's a different use case. And so like with Auto-Tune, I mentioned it's sort of pushing generally it's corporations wanting control, wanting legibility over their singers by people they can control who are conventionally attractive as opposed to people who can sing. But there's use case of if I was trying to write a song and wanted to share it, I could use Auto-Tune. And likewise with like clip art, like which is the example I use for drawing, like you can use clip art. You don't have to draw to make memes or to make cards and stuff, right? There's use cases for these things, but they are not writing. And that's the thing, is that these AI blogs, I mean, they clearly do better than I'm doing, and they're clearly making more money. I haven't monetized my blog yet, but I would not expect to be making a lot. And if you have more than 10 times my subscribers, I don't know how much of this market would be a market if they didn't know they were AI. Given that this woman is open about them, I assume her market would be there. But it is also people, like I have looked at enough AI content that I'm like, yeah, I'm just not interested in really looking at it. And I only looked at this blog post because Allison was taking it seriously, and I wanted to actually engage with it. And the other thing that really, really annoyed me about this post, by the way, is she's saying, guess who they're going to detect like as AI first? It's going to be the neurodivergent people. Well, guess what? I'm neurodivergent, and humans sometimes ask if I'm AI, if I'm doing AI writing. And I made a video about that. But I've had a friend of mine, I keep saying, because I was sort of wondering that too, I write in weird ways, and she ran a bunch of my stuff to a bunch of these tools, and it always comes back human. And I am curious to see what Pangram says, but I do think, like, I write so weirdly, even trying to be normal, that I'm probably one of the last humans AI detection tools would mistake for AI. And also, like, usually this is raised as it's an accessibility issue for neurodivergent people. Well, again, I'm neurodivergent. I've talked about drawing, like I have terrible fine motor skills, and there are genuine accessibility issues. Like I didn't realize I liked writing until I learned to type. And my parents tried to teach me with the home row method, which I could never learn. And then when I realized I liked writing with typing, I became a good touch typist, and I screwed up my hands. And I was actually faster than the average touch typist, and I found studies, because my friend didn't believe me when I said, hey, I'm actually fast. Because I don't usually use my ring fingers, so I'm typing with 8 fingers instead of 10. She couldn't believe me I was as fast as home row method, but I found studies that show they are, and I tested and I found that I was when I was typing with my fingers. Like that's an accessibility tool, but it's still like conveying my own thoughts, not through the filter of AI. And now that I'm using speech to text, you have AI kind of filtering my thoughts, but generally in a way I can catch and correct, right? It will use the wrong word, it will add negations, remove negations, add question words. And I sometimes miss those, but it gets most of my thoughts, right? Whereas LLMs change a lot, like if you're feeding them your thoughts, and it never aligns with what you're saying. And again, you're not entitled to an audience. I would love to be a creative professional, and I've realized that because I'm weird, I'm going to have a hard time doing that compared to someone who is more normal. And my lesson isn't, well, I'm going to use AI to do that. It wouldn't work. It would provide a parody of my thoughts. It would defeat the point of trying to be creative. Like I recognize I need to do this to make it work. She also, one of her sections, she's claiming that it's ironic that people are using an AI tool to identify AI writing. Okay, quick addendum. I realized I didn't actually explain why it is that the irony of people using an AI tool to detect AI writing makes no sense, which might be obvious to some of you, but it's that it's a very superficial comparison. In fact, the kind of comparison that someone getting AI to do their writing for them might come up with, because the complaint about AI writing, for the most part, isn't about AI. I mean, there are Luddites, but in general, it's about AI writing not being useful and or being deceptive. And so charitably, she might have missed this because she is open about the fact that she is using AI writing. I mentioned the AI blog on AI that commented on a couple of my early posts, presumably to farm like fake activity. And this was a blog claiming like their profile was just full of highly credentialed buzzwords, nothing specific. The grammar was poor. So they were clearly claiming to be someone who would be credentialed and an expert in AI. And it's possible that they were and just running this program with basically no oversight. But more likely, it's just some random person who learned a little bit about AI and is straight up lying about their credentials, which is a common issue. But even in the case of you're being open about it, I think people still kind of have a complaint about it's being pushed. It's like how on Etsy, like even if you're open about this is an AliExpress listing, you're still, it's harder to find actual stuff if you're sorting through all of that, especially when it's like redundant and replicative. And I don't know necessarily with Substack how valid of a complaint that is. If it's like overwhelming discovery and Substack doesn't have a very good discovery algorithm, that could be frustrating. Definitely, I notice when I'm on my homepage, the posts that Substack promotes, as you should check this out, look AI, and I haven't looked at these profiles to see if they are, but they look very generic. And my complaint would be generic stuff anyways, and I'll have a video on YouTube. I don't actually get that because I don't look at too much generic stuff. But anyways, I wanted to clarify that quickly that, again, the problem with the whole, oh, there's an irony here, is that the complaints of people about AI blogs isn't necessarily a complete opposition to AI. It is that it's AI being presented as if it is actual writing, as opposed to this basically pseudo-corporate copy that AI is actually generating. And so, again, basically, to summarize, yeah, I don't think AI writing is writing. I think it's something different. It has use cases that might be valid, but I think this defensiveness that you're seeing around it is because these people are making money from it. They may be making a living, they may be close to making a living and feel like it's within reach. And they kind of feel like they are owed that, as C.S. Lewis would talk about, but you're not. And they also might feel like they're owed the respect of being writers. And again, you're not. You're not writing like writing as art. You are writing a simulacra of like disposable corporate speak copywriting. And so yeah, I hope that was clear. I might redo the video or do another one if it wasn't. But I'm just frustrated by this because, again, I'm not anti-AI. I think there are use cases, but you need to understand what you're doing. And these arguments about AI writing is valid writing and it's an accessibility thing. No, it's not. You are, if that's what you're doing, you are an uncreative, unoriginal person who feels like you are entitled to earn a living and acclaim from your writing. And I generally try to have patience for people with like different views and try to understand them. But this is one I have no patience for, especially because of how many people use this neurodivergence argument, which is, as someone who is neurodivergent, as someone who is, because of this, inaccessible to a lot of people and has to work at it, and because I've worked at it, I recognize if I used AI tools to try to make my writing accessible, it would lose the point of what I'm doing. It is just, the whole thing's frustrating to me. And maybe I'll make a more sane, calm follow-up in a few weeks, but I had this on my mind and I couldn't get it off my mind enough to make the video I was going to make today. So thanks for watching. I'm Magpie, and I'll see y'all in the next one.